Welcome, guys, to the finale of What If Dale Survived, the remake. My god, 42 frickin' parts later. I will not lie when I said that this is probably my most worked on, ambitious, complicated yet awesome, and most in-depth project that I have ever worked on regarding topics or anything in the history of ever. And I really hope that you guys have enjoyed, and you guys definitely do not want to miss this finale. So hit that subscribe button and pack yourselves in for a long frickin' finale. Now, we ended off the semi-final episode with Alpha and the Whisperers appearing at Hilltop to get Lydia back after that whole thing transpired, and Eastman and Rick wanting to save Lydia for Dale and Tyrese's sake, and what Maggie said about keeping their humanity still and everything. But Benjamin and Henry both say that giving over Lydia is the last thing that they should do. Benjamin would do it way more than Henry, because, like I said, Benjamin would actually be the one, like in another story of mine, that would get into a relationship with her in the first place. But Henry would still side. And Rick, he would go along with it, pointing his gun at the gates of Hilltop and saying to Alpha, "You're not getting your daughter," he would quote-unquote her, "back. Never. We know what you've done with her. We know who you are. You are never getting her back. Leave Hilltop and never return, or there's going to be problems." Alpha will not take no for an answer, and she says if she was them, they'd reconsider, and pulls out Luke from the crowd with the Whisperers holding him hostage. Just Luke this time, not obviously no saviors, because they ain't here, but they're alive. Yumiko and Magna, even though it's just Luke and everything, they would still do this regardless, obviously, like they did in the original story, but they obviously don't want to risk Luke's well-being for a girl with this tribe of killers that wear the masks of the walkers and everything. And Rick's like, that can be arranged. And a bunch of guards at Hilltop throw a bunch of spears and bullets and kill every Whisperer in the vicinity, and precisely and within a few seconds aim their guns square at Alpha. So yeah, within the span of a few seconds, Alpha is the only Whisperer left in the area. And she is significantly and completely outgunned and outnumbered, with no Whisperers to back her up. And now, Rick's the one saying that she should reconsider, because now she ain't got nobody to hold hostage because Luke's saved, and she has no one around her to protect her. So, yeah, she isn't getting anywhere. And with this, Alpha, she was crazy, obviously, but she wasn't stupid. So she's obviously not going to stay or try to rebel whenever she is outmanned and outgunned. So, for now, with whatever walkers are in the area, she just puts back on her mask and leaves, but not before saying that they just made the biggest mistake of their life. Ironically, the same thing that Negan said before Dale and Tyrese ended up biting the dust. So, yeah, ominous. And Lydia, Alpha is not dead here, and she's not going back. But she isn't going to be the most upset. She's going to be upset that her mother didn't see sense and just, like, give up peacefully. Now she's actually going to try and seek war. And obviously Lydia is going to be back and forth with her emotions. Now we're going to fast forward a little bit here because few major things. Number one, for an obvious thing, we are entering a similar plot with my stories. Alpha doesn't get Lydia, which I've done in a handful of stories. I've sort of mix-matched my stories, whether she gets Lydia and they go and fight Beta and do that whole thing, or they end up killing Alpha and all the Whisperers, and then Beta just shows up with the Horde and then that happens. I've done literally handfuls, like, through and through. But it's different now because of one simple thing. Lydia is not taken, but Alpha is alive, and she goes back to see Beta and everybody else, which means that Alpha is going to think of this smart, instead of Beta rushing in like all my other stories and ultimately, yes, getting a good handful of kills. What if Amy survived specifically? And yeah, that whole deal, even in the original, whenever he became the quote-unquote Alpha. And with that, Alpha says they're going to get Lydia back, but they're going to do it smart. They'll never see him coming. And with that, Ezekiel, the kingdom, the fair, and all that stuff plays out with a much better kingdom, a much better hilltop, and much better communities because of the lessened threat of the saviors, which, again, I've covered before. So, we just get a much more better planned out fair. Everything, and the highwaymen and all that goes the same, for the most part, with a lot of changes. But then we get to Alpha disguising herself with one particular big change. Sasha and Ezekiel being together means that Sasha's gonna be around, and whenever Alpha disguises herself and talks to Ezekiel, Sasha's gonna pick up on the fact that she seems very familiar. I don't know if Sasha would be at Hilltop at the time. It really doesn't matter, all things considered. But Sasha, I know, would feel that something's not right about her. But that thought would pass for the moment. And the people who would get kidnapped by Alpha and the Whisperers and everything leading up to the Pike scene, which is gonna be very, very big, is Rick, Morgan, Daryl, and Yumiko. So, Daryl and Yumiko are the only originals, people from that specific scene, and Rick and Morgan are the extras. And we get a Rick and Alpha dialogue, or beginning up to dialogue, with Alpha taking Rick, specifically, because he's the one who drove her away and killed all her men at the gates, to see her humongous horde. And I once again left it undecided that the horde that they led away in the story from Alexandria would meet Alphas or not, which again really doesn't matter for how I planned the story, but it will make things very interesting if the horde were to get there. And Alpha would basically just say what she said to Rick in the comics and what she said to Daryl in the show. So, honestly, nothing really differs here, you know? It would just be the same old Alpha bullcrap. And Rick, I feel, there would be differences specifically with him, because he is a much different Rick. I don't know if I really have to say that, but yeah, he is way different. So the dialogue that he would present towards Alpha in this small moment would be different, but overall the conversation and how Alpha feels and the whole dynamic there, it really wouldn't change at all. Like, at all. So there really isn't too much to talk about here. Alpha preaches her gospel whisperer crap, and Rick just tries to stay cool, calm, and composed because of who he is in the story and in general. And Alpha says that they should have given her Lydia when they had the chance. this is what had to happen. But she leaves that to the imaginations of Rick and everybody else and tells them to go and tells them about the border to the north and about the land and everything. They meet Sadiq by the specific border, and this is where we see the infamous Pike scene, which I said was going to be big. Now, the Pike scene, the last victim, I'm just going to warn you guys, is a little bit of a nod back to my last story. But I'm not going to bring up any further details until we get into the victims, and then I'll explain when we get to the last victim. But overall, the victims as a whole, you guys are going to want to pay attention to. Ken, Adeline, or Addie, Roddy, or Rodney, or however you say his name, Jesus, Richard, Tobin, Deanna, don't think I've ever made her a Pike victim, Olivia, Luke, which I've never really killed past season 11, or ever, probably, Megan, Gregory, who I've never had as a Pike victim, and last but not least, Eastman. Now, this is probably the shortest Pike roster that I've had here, but because of the lessened impact besides the Whisperers killed at the gates and no beta quarrel, the roster, even though we have big characters here, Eastman specifically, from What If Eastman Survived, it's a major moment and turning points because of what's about to happen next. And this is why I said you guys do not want to miss this finale. And at this point, Rick is beyond tired of losing people. Everyone that they've lost and everything like that, this has gone beyond the pale. The Saviors and Dale and everything, that was one thing to turn them all. And what happened with Dale and all that. He tried and tried to just ignore them and keep moving forward. Like, keep himself in a position where he doesn't have to be a monster. But it's just happened over and over again and again. Even getting his own son killed. Which, again, I feel like a broken record when I say that, but it is a really big moment. But now he says that if those Whisperers want a war, oh, they're going to definitely get one. And now they got to assemble everyone and anyone and literally everyone under the sun for an all-out war with the Whisperers. And the first team that they go to look for is Sherry and the Saviors, who by this point, Sherry has more than gotten the Saviors under her control. If she didn't at first, she definitely would now. And after hearing about Dale's unfortunate demise, that he didn't make it, and then Eastman and everyone with the Whisperers, she does feel very, very upset about this, especially what she did to protect them from the Saviors and everything like that, and how her and Dale both wanted Negan dead and everything. But she did promise Rick and them that she would come to their aid regardless if they ever needed it. And it has been, by this point, over 6 years since they crossed paths. So, yeah, Sherry's definitely not going to say no to this. And with it, the Saviors, literally pretty much all of them, except obviously Simon and Negan, are going to join the fight. And Tara, after over 6 years, goes to Oceanside to try and recruit them. Now, Tanya doesn't really like the idea of possibly being teamed up with the Saviors, obviously, even if Negan is dead. And these Whisperers, they don't sound too much better from the looks of things. And after so long, over 6 years of peace, finally getting Oceanside back together, why do they want to jeopardize that now? But Cindy would wholeheartedly disagree with this, because this piece has given them time to learn that the pain and everything in this world now, it doesn't go away, which is what Rick literally just finally learned. And Tara kept her promise for a long time. And she feels that if Tara can honor her promise, they should honor her and fight for her. So it's ultimately like a give to get sort of situation, if you guys get what I mean. So with that, Oceanside has the incentive and the goal to help out Alexandria and everybody else against the Whisperers. So now we got all the communities along with the Saviors and Oceanside at their helm. Now with Morgan, we're going to touch upon something very important, which is where this finale takes a big turn. Morgan, we've seen him with what he's been throughout the entirety of the series. Then he gets to learn Aikido. Then he gets Michonne's sword. We already had that before Aikido. Then he gets the stick and the sword, and then axe and sword. But here, with Eastman's death and everything finally making Morgan evolve into a true warrior and killer after Eastman, specifically, he actually cuts off the part of his stick, except a small portion, breaks off the entire handle of Michonne's sword, and with this, we now have an axe sword. So it's literally Morgan's renified axe in this series with Michonne's tip of the blade at the end of it. So this is literally the best weapon or combination of weapons that you could give Morgan Jones. So yeah, we're gonna get him really revved up for this finale. And since the Saviors are getting into the fold of this means that Morales is finally going to meet Rick and everybody else again after over pretty much 7 years, to be completely frank with you, because they didn't meet when they did in the original, because Sherry left herself to take care of the Saviors. So Rick and them didn't even know about Morales, and he would hear about Dale and everything else, and it would honestly be a touching moment for Morales to come back and everything. It would be much more nice. And as for the Kingdom, Ezekiel, he wouldn't be broken to fight the Whisperers, but any insecurities or doubt he would feel, Sasha would put to rest, because for one thing, they're together, and for another, Sasha feels that the Kingdom definitely needs to step up, not just for who they've lost and what everybody's fought for, but because she freaking knew that Alpha was, like, she knew that she was bad. She knew that the disguise, that person was bad news. And if she'd known who it specifically was, she would have sniped her straight in the face, problem solved. But she just couldn't trust her gut. She couldn't trust it. Then we get a time skip, we get into training day, and the satellite crash and the fire, which would be significantly undermined, and a similar scene with Rick and Morgan going out to try and find Alpha. But it's not Rick tracking down Morgan like in my What If Rick Exiled Shane the remake, but it's both of them tracking down Alpha. So we have a much more significant moment here. Now, I feel like I maybe did this twist in one other story, but I feel like it was just What If Rick Exiled Shane the remake, and the two of them just fought. You could correct me in the comments if you please. But what they don't know is that a dark, big, and merciless shadow is haunting them, or more specifically, hunting them. And they don't even know about it until it's too late. Whenever they're going to the cliff where the Whisperer's camp is, and Alpha would step out. Rick gets stabbed by one of Beta's knives straight in the gut. Morgan whirls around to see this and is very surprised and taken back and goes over to help, but Rick says no. And they would actually know who Beta is here, not because they met him back at the building, because remember, that didn't happen, or even at Hilltop. They would have met him at the camp when they were kidnapped. But Rick knows that this guy is probably Alpha's best fighter. They have to know that by this point, and say that if he's here, Alpha and her army cannot be far behind. And this satellite crash and everything, it's all building up to this moment right here. He will take care of Beta, but Morgan needs to find Alpha. But Morgan just wheels out his axe, sword, stick, slash. It's a 3-weapon combination and it's freaking sick. But honestly, can't really come up with a name for that, really. But anyways, Morgan would pull out his weapon and be like, no. This is exactly the point where he would bring up Woodbury and what happened there, how Rick almost died there, and how he is not going to leave him to his own devices twice, because what if he actually dies here? And Rick said, he won't die. He won't. Morgan should trust him way more than that. He literally took on Tyrese, Eastman, and Dale all at the same time back at Father Gabriel's church, and they've all lived through so much even of Woodbury and everything together. Morgan just needs to have faith in him and let him take care of Beta. He takes care of Alpha and whoever else, and yells at Morgan at this point, similarly to Woodbury's moments, recreating that epic Part 13 moments, telling Morgan, get the frick out of here, find Alpha. And Morgan, even though he is having way too many flashbacks of that specific moment, he's like, he can't argue with Rick. Because remember, he snapped him out of his craziness, and Rick got snapped out of his own. It's really just like, mixed character development. So he just goes to find Alpha. He ain't gonna argue with Rick. He knows where that's gotten him. And Beta, he wouldn't even care. He would call this very stupid by Rick's part, telling his friend with the sick weapon who he would even recognize, why would he make him leave like that? With the both of them, especially with that guy, Morgan, with that weapon, which, once again, Beta would definitely recognize. Like, how could he not? Because we all know how Beta was with his weapons and how he got when he fought Daryl. He had that small nod of appreciation. And he would be like, nah, that was stupid. Now you've literally left yourself to die. And Rick, gathering himself, still stabbed in the gut, by the way, begins to stand up and look somewhat almost undamaged and be like, no, that's where you're wrong. And there's one thing that you should definitely never forget about me. One thing that will haunt you right here and now. And Beta, mockingly and angrily, would ask him in a mocking tone, and what is that? Rick would pull out his gun, machete, or whatever melee weapon he would use with the gun, and say, you made the biggest mistake thinking that stabbing me would end me. Because, as you're about to find out, this isn't the first time that I've been impaled. And with that, Rick shoots at Beta, Beta ducks the shot, and this begins Rick and Beta into an epic fight scene, which I don't think that I've ever had the specific two of them fight except in, like, one story, and that was probably What If Madison's Family Joined Rick. Other than that, never really had them fight. Meanwhile, Morgan finds Alpha, step out of her camp onto the bottom of that cliff, and see Morgan this time instead of Carol, because she's long gone, and would look at him much more mockingly than Carol, because she knows who he is and everything and what he lost, and would even say to him, you can't do anything to me. And she would know that Beta is most likely near and everything, but she knows that Morgan can most likely not do anything to her from up there. But Morgan, he ain't scared of this taunting or anything. He takes her up on the bluff, shoots both her legs from a long distance with his gun, jumps, literally a long jumping run jump off the cliff, and sledges his axe straight into Alpha's chest with that long running jump, and then the axe straight into the chest. But this isn't enough in Morgan's eyes. If he wants to end the Whisperers and their leader and their run and what they've done to Eastman and everybody, a simple freaking running jump, shots to the legs with his gun and everything, that's not gonna do. So he wrenches the axe out of Alpha's chest, whirls around with the Michonne tip, which is no longer the stick, mind you, it's Michonne's sword, whirls around with it and slices Alpha's head clean off, which would be a pretty epic moment from the axe to the sword in a matter of seconds. So yeah, definitely probably my most epic Alpha kill of all time, I'd have to say. After this, every Whisperer and pretty much the entire Horde would be aware of Morgan's presence at this time, because literally, Morgan just got himself into the field of the Whisperer camp. And this is where every Whisperer, every member of Alpha's crew, and the entirety of the Horde would be aware of, basically the Whisperers only, would be aware of Alpha's death, would call the Horde, and they would be heading straight for Morgan. Now by this point, Morgan is angry still even after killing Alpha, because Eastman, while probably not meaning as lot to him as the original Eastman story, he still did mean a heck of a lot, don't get me wrong. And he's hungry for more. And this isn't clear Morgan, but it is darkish Morgan, to say the least. And he begins to doubt himself if he can literally take all these Whisperers on and the entirety of the Horde that they saw. But then he remembers. He took out an entire Horde at Woodbury. He can do it again, even if it is bigger. With the way he is now, the way he's developed, and the way he is, Morgan grabs his axe, stick, sword combination of 3-weapon, and whatever gun he would have at his disposal, and literally, in the finest moments of Morgan's character, he would kill and begin to kill and keep killing every single Whisperer, every Single Walker, and every remnant of Alpha's camp, army, Horde, and every aspect in any vicinity. Any walkers that would come by, dead. Any Horde or Whisperer members, dead. Any people that were trying to run away, dead. Morgan would kill them all without going full clear mode. Because that is how much Morgan has developed in this story. Bringing back the part 13 moment, actually it was way past part 13 he took care of that Woodbury Horde, but it would be so much better because of how much bigger the army and the Horde was. Morgan just took care of the Horde in Woodbury, but he'd be taking care of a Horde and the Whisperer army, while Rick and Beta are still fighting. And Rick, while he would put up a good fight, he wouldn't be able to get past Beta's brute strength, versatile maneuvers, and just raw up knowing how to fight as a whole, like the way Beta is. But Rick is far from a man who gives up so easily. So he begins to play defensively. When Beta goes for a strike again, Rick, this time, collectively dodges it, scratching his arm, but he still manages to dodge the attack. And right at that moment, he shoots Beta square in the chest twice and then goes in with his axe to try and go to the neck or the head or just to finish him off, because he feels like after this long fight that this should definitely finish him off, you know? But because of Beta not encountering anybody, never getting thrown in the staircase, not losing his eyes, and not getting hurt, Beta is in far more of a condition to power through this than you would think. And he is not going to get killed or weakened that much by 2 gunshots. Takes the opportunity, dodges the axe attack, and uses one of his knives and stabs it straight into Rick Grimes' throat. Straight in the middle of it. And with this would be another sick moment and a very upsetting moment to think that Rick Grimes was about to win. He begins to drop down, seemingly about to die, before uttering words that would etch into Beta's mind and everyone's listening. You don't get to choose for the world. You don't get to choose for me. Ones who live line for anyone involved who actually got the reference. And with this, after he says those words, Beta, surprised he could still speak, goes in for a strike, but Rick, right after saying these words, holds his machete right up high, and right after saying this, and Beta going in for the strike, this is all happening very fast, mind you, he holds the machete up high, yells out at the top of his lungs, and plunges the machete straight into Beta's head. And with wasting no time, because he doesn't want to lose here, shoots Beta in the chest, the neck, and the head, symbolizing another familiar moment whenever he killed Martinez back at Morgan's old apartment. Collectively ending the Whisperer threat, and in a very, very sick Rick Grimes way. Keep in mind, Rick Grimes is lucky to have done this because he was stabbed in the gut, worn out from the fight, and he just got stabbed in the neck and literally was still able to kill Beta. But it's not all peaches and cream as you might think. Because of that, the stab in the gut, stab in the neck, the wearing out of the fight, scratches from the knives that Beta had, and putting all his strength into the battle, and that last little bit of adrenaline that he used to kill Beta, Rick just wasted all the strength that he had. And he falls down to the ground, using it all up. And Morgan, literally, by the way, killing every single remnant of the Whisperer army and the Horde once again. He is still bloody tired, mind you, because he isn't Clear Morgan, so he's obviously going to feel ramifications from this. He now is snapped back into reality after doing all that, and knows that he had left Rick up there because he wanted him to fight Beta. Now he has to go back up because he's getting worried. And once he gets back up there, running speed, he sees that Rick's on death's door and literally bookets over up top the mountain cliff and literally bookets over, running as fast as he can, seeing Rick at death's door and Beta on the ground dead. But Rick is still moving. Morgan doesn't care. He's getting back up. He knew he shouldn't have left Rick to his own devices. But this was a Morgan and Sasha, in this kind of scenario. And by this point, Darrow and several others would be aware of everything that's happened with the gunshots, the yelling, the noises, everything, and would ask Morgan, what the freak happened? Seeing Rick on the ground. Morgan would look on the ground, and he really wouldn't know how to answer to this because he wanted to help Rick. He wanted to, but he couldn't listen. He couldn't perk himself up to want to listen to Rick. But before he can say anything or before Darrow can jump on him, Rick summons up every last gasp of air and strength that he can for a final speech towards Darrow and Morgan and says, I did this. It wasn't Morgan's fault. I chose to kill Beta. with all I had. And with this, I know that I'm going to die. But at least I know that I died for something. And before I go, to the two of you specifically, and to everyone that I've ever led, I would like to give you both specifically, and everyone else, my last words. And this would be a weird yet very honest way for Rick to talk in his last moments. Because yeah, sadly, that's where we're getting. But I'm not going to rob you of the speech that Rick's about to give. He would tell Daryl of how proud he is of him and the man that he became. All the way back from the Atlanta camp, after Woodbury and the governor, him surviving with him and everyone else surviving up till that point, that Daryl never gave up on Rick. He never gave up on the group, and he kept on going. He never gave up, and he stood by Rick's side. And that he's even sure that his crappy brother Merle and everyone else, they would be proud of the man that Daryl became. And Rick admits he is too. And then he would look at Morgan and everybody else and say he couldn't be prouder to lead an amazing group. That they never gave up on him through thick and thin after he had lost everything. His son, his wife, his best friend. Now his daughter will be fatherless and parentless. But this had to be done. It had to. And says that he's really very sorry that it had to come to this. But something good did come out of it. He got to lead an amazing group of people. They kept Dale and everyone's memories alive for as long as they could. And now, he thinks he's finally found his true family. And with that, Rick dies. He falls to the ground and is no more. Everyone in the area, more than Dale, would start bawling because it is freaking Rick Grimes. And I've never killed Rick Grimes, ever. Except for in my What If Shane Killed Rick and very few small sub-stories, like What If Rick's group died at the CDC, but that's beside the point. Rick is now dead. And this is where the story takes the darkest turn, and this is the most significant moment in the entire story. Morgan is the only one that doesn't cry. The second that Rick Grimes dies, Morgan's mind completely melts away. His eyes are turned blood red, and he is feeling the malice of 1,000 furious men. His clear mode has resurfaced. Rick's rage and Dale's rage pale in comparison to the monster that Morgan is now devolving into. His eyes, he had lost Rick, his son, his wife, Eastman, Dale, everyone that Morgan cared about. It's now gone. And with how Morgan is, nothing is going to stop him from what happens next. Morgan's and the story's most pivotal and darkest moment. The second after Rick Grimes dies, Morgan's eyes turn a blood red. He grabs his axe, sword, stick weapon, and begins murdering every single person in the area. I'm talking every one of the saviors, every one of the kingdom, Daryl, Beth, every single person. He would literally murder them unstoppably. And after that, Morgan wouldn't stop. No part of Morgan is now there. It is just a bloodlusted, furiously driven, clear mode man on a killing spree, killing everyone in Alexandria, the Hilltop, the Kingdom, the Sanctuary, Oceanside. Nothing could stop him because Morgan had nothing left. Rick dying was the ultimate consequence for this story and for Morgan. And no one would want to fight back against him. Everyone would be so heartbroken at Rick Grimes' death and everyone's deaths. They wouldn't want to fight Morgan. They would have no urge to. Morgan would just be unstoppable. And with no communities to combat them, the Reapers and the Commonwealth would be the tipping point that finally kill and break Morgan's killing streak. After literally rampaging through bunches of communities, unstoppable and clear mode, Morgan would finally die to the Reapers and the Commonwealth. And with no communities to stop them, the Reapers and the Commonwealth would have a war. But neither side would win. It would be a stalemate. And with that, neither side would actually rule overall. It would be nothing. And even if there were surviving members, it wouldn't matter. There would be no leader. There would be no one to take up the rule. No community, besides the CRM and obviously other communities that would be left unknown, obviously, would have any kind of control in on this part of the story because of what Morgan and Rick and everything just did. The world would literally belong to walkers. Morgan's killing spree, Rick's death, it would ultimately lead to death, to darkness, to rampage, which ultimately proves that Rick's death here means more than anything. And yeah, I said that the finale would be very pivotal, and I meant every single word of it. But after that, after the zombies, the walkers would rampage the world. After the wars, the killings, the blood spree, Morgan, Rick, everything just goes dark. Like it was all a dream. And then we begin to see flashes of a farm, of a familiar terrain, and then Dale Horvath at Herschel's farm. Turns out this was all in Dale's head. And Dale, he doesn't know what to think. Experiencing all of this, he sits outside at Herschel's farm. It's night. He's outside looking at a rotting corpse of an animal. And at that moment, all of that big plot and everything that happened, that flashed in his head, he can't believe what he just witnessed and saw in his head. How it happened. It was just so random. Him surviving, people surviving, and then dying? Him surviving led to that? To all of these people's deaths. His own, Eastman's, Tyrese's, Andrea's, Shane's, Rick's, Morgan's, all of these people, these groups, these communities. And all because of him? Of his survival. And Dale, he is thinking so much about what just went on in his head that he doesn't see a very familiar walker appear behind him. And it tackles him to the ground and begins to bite and claw at him. But this time, Dale doesn't want to fight. He now sees a different side of the story and himself. Him surviving, it ultimately meant a much darker story. Him surviving, it didn't help anything. Sure, it made a lot of people survive, but he didn't get to live till the end. Heck, even more people died. Rick Grimes and his best friend Morgan most of all. And that if he dies here, it ultimately might make things better. And in ultimate terms, it sounds twisted, but on a side of things, Dale just says to himself that this is how it has to be. And when everyone, familiar faces, Daryl, and everyone there, finally collecting himself back to that moment after Randall was cut free because of Carl's stupidity, and everyone sees Dale about to die and Daryl's about to put out his lights, Dale begins to open his mouth and groan slightly as if he's about to say something. Because even he knows that he's about to die because he wanted it to happen. But Andrea, before Daryl's about to do it, says that, no, he's about to say something. And Dale says, with the last of his strength, do not lament my absence. Do not kill yourselves and lose yourselves over me. Don't let your humanity and your pride get lost because of the people that you lose. And even if you lose people, don't lose sight of who you are. And don't let anybody choose your lives for you. Remember me and everyone you lose, but don't lose yourselves. And with that, nobody knows what to think of this, and is very sad, but bang, the shot goes off. So as you can see, Dale surviving ultimately would just be a figment of his own mind. Him thinking with his moral compass and his guide to the entirety of the group at the time would somehow help, but ultimately it would lead to a bunch of disastrous moments, including the death of not only himself, not only his character change, not only the death of the people that he cared most about, but of Rick Grimes, and Morgan would be in an unkillable mode, at least until the Reapers in the Commonwealth would eventually put him and anybody else who would oppose them out of their miseries before an all-out war would ensue, and almost the entirety of the Walking Dead world would be shadowed in walkers and darkness. Ultimately, Dale surviving, even if it would be a figment of his imagination, which is really something that I bet would anger a lot of you guys, or has, but ultimately it felt like a great conclusion, especially after Rick's death, which I've never done before in any stories except little short ones, and then what if Shane killed Rick. But honestly, with the way the story went and how it played into a factor of not only Rick and Dale, but everybody else, it truly felt like, even if it went to an overall dark ending, it wasn't truly an ending. If you think about it, my What If The Walking Dead Was a Dream, that's gonna be a Walking Dead rewrite, you could call this a hint of that in the form of Dale surviving the remake. Ultimately, he would see himself as the greater problem through his vision before he would meet his demise and get gutted by the walker that Carl really was stupid enough not to just kill. But ultimately, Dale accepted his fate this time and knew that if he were to live, his vision would become a reality and everyone would suffer for it. And even though the original story holds towards many of the characters still dying, even if there's different ways, it's still in, I'm sure, Dale's mind, your guys' mind, and my own, is a much better story and end-off, and continuing theme, rather than the story and vision we got from Dale. So, this all might have happened if Dale survived, or if Dale had a vision of himself surviving. Now, I truly hope that you guys enjoyed the story. Jesus, this is my longest story to date, for sure. I definitely put way more work into this than I thought. And when I reached that dark ending. I originally thought that the series was going to be over. And then I continued on with the plot twists, and I found that there was more to the story than I gave it credit for. And I got deeper and deeper and deeper in. And once we reached this point, after months of work and real-life situations, and then I got to this point, it brought me back to when I did What If Goku went Super Saiyan 4 against Jackie Chun, where I made it a dark ending, and it was a really long project, just like this one. But it wasn't just due to the dark ending, it was because of how long it was for the dark ending. But I would have made the Dale series survival remake either way had I done that dark remake all the way back in part 13. So, ultimately, it was good enough, so I'm not gonna get rid of the entire series. And I really hope that in the end, dream, vision, or anything, that you guys enjoyed it for what it was. And that you accept how the story revolved and how Dale saw himself as a character. Now, the next story will not be as long, no siree Bob, but it will focus on another character, getting his time to shine in the form of Merle Dixon. What if Daryl died instead of Merle, making Merle the new Daryl Dixon? Now, I've done Merle themes before. What if T-Dog never dropped the key? What if Merle met Negan? Which there's going to be a remake to that really, really soon. And it's not like there's not going to be more Merle-themed videos, but What If Daryl Died Instead of Merle will be the next story, and it will definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, not be as long as this story went to be. I truly hope that you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys for the start of What If Daryl Died Instead of Merle next time. I'll see you guys later.